Welcome to another episode of Anything But Ordinary. Tonight's topic, Haunted Wyoming. We are your most awesome host. I am Spooky, and here is Raven.
Hey.
Hey.
We just want to tell everybody, happy holidays. We hope everybody has...
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, for those who celebrated. And, for those who don't, we hope you have a wonderful week. Tonight's topic, we kind of wanted to do this again, because it's one of our favorite reoccurring show topics that we have, where we're trying to do, each state in the U.S.
Right.
And we have already done a few other states, like Louisiana and, I already forgot, Colorado and some other stuff. And we're definitely going to be kind of doing a repeat on several of these different states again, because there's just too many places that we're finding out in each state that have a plethora of paranormal activity to, UFOs, to cryptids, to everything. So
I know
it's kind of one of my favorite show topics that we do is hitting up each state,
Right, and it's hard to get we cannot possibly get everything in one show. So some of these states, we're just going to have to do a part 2. Now, while looking for haunted places in the state, I was amazed at how many there are. Some are well known, some, not so much.
Well, yeah, that's why we're here, to bring the ones not so known to other people's attention. But I always find it, really fascinating, when I'm going and just doing the stuff on our own, because sometimes it's not even just for show ideas, but we're always reading about different things anyway. But I noticed when I was doing my research that when it comes to Wyoming, it's not just a hot spot for paranormal encounters and people having spirit encounters or whatever, but I noticed that there seems to be a lot of cryptids talked about as well as UFOs.
Oh yeah.
I was just trying to research, find some different places, like you said, talk about certain popular ones and unpopular ones tonight. But when I was doing my research, I noticed there was a thing, where there were just a lot of Bigfoot sightings. And I found that kind of interesting, because it just seems interesting to me that there's a lot of Bigfoots here and there, you know what I mean? And it seems like a lot of people are into it. So we're going to have to end up including those type of cryptids or UFO topic in one of our other shows when it comes to Wyoming, because there seem to have been a lot of people having some kind of encounters.
I was thinking about that too, because you don't hear so much about Bigfoot sightings in Wyoming, although just about every state in this country has some sort of a Bigfoot sighting one way or another. But I was very amazed that Wyoming was such a hot spot for UFOs.
Well, a lot of people see it everywhere, I guess. But
yeah.
Like I said, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about when we're going to have to do a show more when it talks about the UFOs and the cryptids when it comes to the state. But we're focusing mainly on the paranormal and aspect as far as apparitions and things like that for tonight anyway. But
right.
Would you like to go first?
Okay, I'll start off with the short one. This is St. Mark's Episcopal Church, and it's located at 11908 Central Avenue in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Now, this is an authentic pioneer Wild West church, and it was also the first official house of worship in Wyoming. Now, back in the day, Cheyenne was a rowdy railroad and cattle town, so in January of 1868, this Reverend Joseph Cook, who was appalled at the unimaginable wickedness in Cheyenne, organized his parishioners to build this church, and they broke ground for the construction in August of 1868. And this church took 7 years to build. Now, it opened for worship in 1875, and that was only just 15 years before Wyoming even gained statehood. It was fashioned after the Stokes Pope's Church in Buckingham, England, and this place served a huge congregation of displaced English and Scottish cattle barons of the late 1800s. I was actually surprised at how many English and Scots people there were in Wyoming. during that era. The exterior was red lava stone, and of course it contains the traditional stained glass windows, and one that they're particularly proud of actually came from Tiffany's. The
That
inside
stuff's
of the
expensive, though. Back in the day when Tiffany's was when they first came out, and the quality of their products is,
right.
we still have some old Tiffany type of lamps and stuff in our own property.
I have some Tiffany sun catchers, cut glass sun catchers, but Tiffany's been around for a long, long time. As far as cut glass goes, they are the epitome of it. The inside of the church resembles an upside down ark with marble floors, and there's oak wood throughout the inside. Now, at this time, even 7 years later, the church wasn't completely done. The actual construction on this church really was not completed until 1927. The bell tower was started in 1869, but there were these two Swedish masons working on it, and one day both of them just disappeared. So the bell tower was capped off until 1927, when construction started on it again.
That's really weird. Why would they just up and leave unless there was like trouble in the area, or they caused some trouble in the area and had to flee? A little too much drinking one night led to a little trouble. You're like, I'm out of here.
There you go. Like I said, construction didn't start again on the bell tower until 1927, but there was a problem. The new workers kept stopping their work on the bell tower because they kept reporting hearing this hammering in the wall, and voices. A voice, not really voices. There was just one voice. And they started thinking, well, there's a ghost in the church. So they finally decided they were going to build this secret room just for the ghost, to make it happy and to make it stop bothering the workers. Now, the church stands today.
That must have been like, something that was passed down through like olden days that they had in their family, where they know if you, because that seems odd. Why would they just build a specific room for it? There must have been some type of, like, when they all came over here from Europe or something, they brought their own, like, lore and whatever. I can't even think what the word is, but the fact that they built a separate room specifically for the ghost. It's very interesting.
During this time, I found out that there were a lot of immigrants that settled in Wyoming during this time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them were from countries that were very superstitious. Everybody's superstitious. Don't get me wrong. Oh, that's the word.
Duh, superstitious. It's been a busy week, doing all this holiday prep and everything else. My brain's like, blah. You know what I mean? So.
But for some reason, like I said, they kept hearing this hammering in the walls, mm-hmm. and kept hearing this voice. And
maybe somebody buried somebody within the walls.
They assumed that it was haunted.
Yeah, but what if it was a real person? Maybe that's why those two guys took off in the first place, because they stuck somebody else in the wall and then bailed, and the guy was still alive, asking for help.
Well, I'm getting to that.
Oh, sorry. I'm just listening to your story.
Okay. But like I said, these workers finally decided, and the church finally decided, that they were going to build this secret room, and it was like under these stairs that led up to the bell tower, hoping that this would make the ghost happy and it would leave the workers alone. Mm-hmm. So the church still stands today, and the church serves a very large congregation. And in 1966, an old man approached the rector, who was a Father Rafter, and confessed to him that in 1927, he was hired along with another man to work on the bell tower. Well, he said that the other man slipped and fell to his death. So this man explained that he panicked and was afraid that he was going to be deported if there was an investigation. So he put the man's body in an unfinished section of wall and sealed it up and ran away.
Oh my gosh.
So today, noises can still be heard coming from the walls of the bell tower, and this voice to this day is still heard. Now, the bell tower is believed to be haunted by this Swedish Mason, and they say there are two spirits in this church. One they believe to be the Swedish Mason that fell to his death in, I think it was 1868 or 1869. Mm-hmm. And the other one they believe it to be Father Rafter. I don't know why Father Rafter's spirit is still there. It didn't really go into it. But like I said, to this day, the sound of voices and the sound of hammering are still claimed to be heard.
Yeah, but that guy, technically, he didn't slip to his death then. If he was, because the guy, he was probably just unconscious. And then the guy sealed him up in the wall. And then the whole time he was trying to get somebody. What an awful way to die, a slow starvation. You know, because it takes a while for you to starve to death. You know?
Well, yeah, you can go up to 3 weeks actually without eating. You can go 3 days without water.
Some people have gone longer, actually. But
you can,
how awful.
But you can go up.
I could see why. His energy.
But I can kind of understand this man. You know, back in the late 1800s, this man panicked because he thought he would be deported. So I don't know if he was here legally or what the story was on him. It didn't go too much into him, except to say that in 1966, so he lived a long, long time. If in 1966 he confessed to sealing this man's body up in the wall.
Well, then technically, I guess he did murder the man because the man was okay until he put the guy in the wall. But okay, so note to self, guys, if you ever hear pounding on the wall, it may not always mean you have paranormal activity. There could be somebody trapped within the wall.
There you go.
That's crazy. I feel that's awful. I could see why his energy could have been imprinted in that place if there was any negative type of encounterings going on. Because think of the emotions that person was going through when they were just trapped within there and nobody was coming to their aid.
I don't know if the man was alive when it was sealed or not. The other man claimed that he was dead. So maybe it's because he didn't get a proper burial. Maybe it's, I mean, he sealed the man's body up in the wall, and this man, he did not, get back to his family. He did not get a proper burial. That could be the reason also.
When I remember, because we do a lot of reading on different things and history stuff, and I know, like, in North Dakota and South Dakota and some other places where they had, people would have these babies back in the day, out of wedlock or whatever, and they would actually, and I'm not trying to be brutal, but this is what happens. People would actually put people in walls and the babies within the walls and stuff. And I know when they were tearing down a lot of the old buildings in North Dakota and South Dakota, that they found a lot of skeleton remains of infants and or adults. So it does happen. People do use that means. Yes, it does happen. But, my thought instantly kind of went to, like, maybe the guy didn't die, and then, while he was knocked out unconsciously, he put him within the wall, and then maybe later on he came to and had enough strength. And that's my first thought. But it's true. It could have been paranormal, or it could have been, since it happened kind of pretty quickly.
That's entirely possible. I mean, he could have fallen. He could have been knocked out, and the other man could have thought he was dead. And, so in a panic, he just put him in an open section of the wall and sealed the wall up, and then he ran off. Mm-hmm. But it just seems to me that's kind of, sorry about that. It just seems to me that it's kind of suspicious anyway that he would hide the man's body and then run off. I mean, he could have even also had something to do with the man's death.
Yeah, well, fear makes people do odd things,
Yes, it does.
In so many ways.
Yes, it does.
But, I mean, if you didn't do something intentionally, go get help for the person, But I guess he was afraid he was going to be deported, but I guess to me, somebody else's life is more important than being deported.
Going into a flat-out panic can make you do some of the stupidest things. Things that you would not even normally do or even think of doing. But when you're in a panic, you just don't think right.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a beautiful looking church. You know, we're going to post links to the different places so you guys can go and check out the insides and stuff. We can only post photos that, you know, we know that we're allowed as far as copyright part goes, you know, but we are going to have in our references links so you guys can go read more in depth about these places that we talk about tonight, as well as see, you know, more photos on it. But, you know, some of the research that I was doing, and it kind of took me all over the place, but I found this one place. It's a hotel in Medicine Bow, Wyoming. It's called the Virginian Hotel. And I thought this one was actually really interesting. Just the history and with the town and how it all went and stuff. But this hotel was first, it's located off of Lincoln Highway in Medicine Bow, Wyoming. For anybody who's interested, they can go there and do a little stay in there. They're still open, and you can do paranormal investigations and stuff. But this hotel was first started to be constructed in 1901, but it wasn't finished until like 1911. And on September 30th, the hotel had like those huge galas, you know, the big grand opening, and where everybody in town just comes and stuff. Well, it was during that time. This hotel, I guess, was one of the largest hotels in the area between Denver and Salt Lake City. So it was really a hot spot. It was often used by many travelers, you know, for business, or you got your socialites, and of course your local cowboys and railroad workers and those who are, you know, migrating, you know, across the states. But the original hotel was 3.5-story structure, and it was designed in like this old Italian architectural type of design, and it was built out of concrete blocks that came from the sand from the Medicine Bow River nearby. Now, many of the natives believed that the river was sacred, and it gave healing to anybody who used it. You know what I mean? It was just a sacred water and everything else. And I just thought it was fascinating that they actually used the sand from that river, you know. But the hotel has like this, the inside, it has like this Victorian type of gold and like burgundy wallpaper, and then, you know, they have that velvet type of, you know, drapes and stuff. And they say that the ceiling in there is about 12 feet high, and I guess there's like 26 rooms, and they all still kind of furnish with the old Western Victorian decor. They have like antique brass beds. They have, you know, the old tulip shaped lights, and you know, like the steam heater radiators.
Right.
And now,
those are the best places to stay.
Yeah.
Where you feel like,
you went right back in time.
When you feel like you're back in the Old West or the Wild West.
Yeah, I love...
Because even in 1901, the Wild West was still going on.
Well, yeah. I mean, it wasn't safe to, you know, travel across the way, you know what I mean? But...
Right.
The first floor on this, I guess, they have like this place, it's called the Eating House, and then they have the Owen Wister dining room, and then they have like the Shiloh Saloon, and inside the Shiloh Saloon they have like tons of like these old Western photos and stuff of back in the day of what it kind of looked like, you know. And they say, just walking through this building, it's almost like you're walking back in it when it was like just 100 years ago, when it was first created. And it said that within the saloon area, you can see like several bullet holes that show you, like back in the older days, that people got a little rowdy. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't like something, didn't like the card game, didn't prefer somebody touching your lady.
Or if they were just,
you know.
or if they were just drunk, they just pulled out their pistols and started shooting.
We need to air.
I don't like your face. Here's a bullet.
Wow. Bullets of love.
I mean, that's basically how it went, too. I mean, they would pull their guns and start shooting for no reason at all. Get them a little drunk, say the wrong thing to them, and it was every man for himself.
Or they'll line up a couple glass mugs or whatever and see who had the best aim after 20 beers or a few
You can't do
whiskeys.
that today. Of course, I don't encourage it today. Don't get me wrong. But back then, they would do that. They would line up. They would have shooting contests right in the saloon.
Yeah. That, I don't know. Anyway, get me off track. Anyway, it's said by some websites that the hotel, I think it was either the 50s or the 70s, they actually shut down the hotel just so they could like do some restoration. Because after a while, you know, a lot of the old buildings are falling down, and somebody ended up purchasing it privately, and they just wanted to keep it exactly how it was. So I think, well, let's just say like 70s, okay? And then by 1978, the hotel was actually added to the National Registry of Historic Places. And then in 1984, so it took them about 10 years or something, maybe a little longer, for them to fully practically have it all restored again. And the hotel was reopened, and it was just, everything was done right back to the turn of the century type of decor. You know what I'm saying? So literally, when you go to this hotel and you stay there, it's like you're stepping back in time. And that's what I love when people do. They keep these old buildings and they try to bring it back to life of how it was when it was first created. Because that's one of the saddest things with history. People just demolish all these amazing buildings
they do that
people
around
with the masonry and the decor inside. It's just amazing, and they're just destroying them just to put a parking lot in or something.
I know they do that around here. You know, if they don't want to restore the building, they just tear it down. And to me, that is just awful. I would rather much see the building restored. I mean, I wish I had the money to buy all of the buildings that they have torn down around here, all the old buildings. Pretty soon, it doesn't look like the old town anymore when you got these modern, ugly buildings. Those buildings had character and they were beautiful.
Yeah, people are asking about why some of the windows might be blurred out. It's Google, okay? It's the Google Maps. You can go and use and take pictures from Google Maps or Wikipedia or stuff like that. But we were only trying to find the ones where we're allowed to use. So, I don't know. It's Google Maps, so it's blurring out the photo. It's not a speed or anything. People were wondering in chat and stuff like that. But many have said that this Virginia hotel actually has like tons of paranormal activity, ranging from many different things. And actually, people do have photos that we can share on the internet, that they do have pictures of apparitions in this hotel. But but we'll post links later for people to check it out. Anyway, they're saying that there's tons of things that occur in this building. Now they talk about there's cold spots being felt, all year round, but especially during the hot summer days. People hear disembodied footsteps and voices being heard. Many employees have stated that objects and items have been moved and placed in different strange places throughout the hotel, places where there's no way it would be there. You know what I mean? Like sometimes behind a stairwell or wherever. Objects should not be moved. Right. Now, many talk about seeing like shadow figures or full body apparitions just appearing and disappearing right in front of them. And then also a lot of people talk about music from older era often being heard. Like the faint music's just playing, and you're trying to find where is it coming from, but they can never directly locate it within the building, but you're hearing it going on, And
I'm going to have to put this place on my bucket list because I read up on this place too, and I just found it really, really fascinating. Even the history alone of this place was very interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. And like they have, I'm going to post the in reference link, the hotel link, where you guys can go, and they have tons of photos of the inside. And it's actually really cheap to stay there. And it's very affordable. A lot of the sections at the one time, they didn't have private baths and everything else. They didn't have TV. They didn't have a lot of stuff for a long time. But I think over time, just lately, they have Wi-Fi. And some of the suites have their own private baths now. But I think the main regular rooms, they don't. They have like a shared bath or something. But like I said, you're stepping back in time. And these people really invested in keeping up the history. And there's people who really love that type of vibe, not just for paranormal, but those who like the history, But this is definitely a place that's very active. But it's not just this hotel. It seems there's a lot of activity going around in the town within itself. So you could hit up a lot of spots, People just do a little paranormal traveling during the summer. This is definitely a place to go hit up in Wyoming. And it's really beautiful, too. If you Google, you can Google map and like spin around on their little roads and stuff and see the area and the river. It's just amazing. But this hotel definitely.
Medicine Bow is a nice little town. Yeah. Okay, the John Kendrick Mansion. This is located at 400 Clarendon Avenue in Sheridan, Wyoming. Now, this mansion is also known as Trail Inn, and it's now a museum, and it sits in an older residential neighborhood of Sheridan, and it is a bit difficult to find without a GPS, or you can Google the directions. This is a 3-story, 39 rooms, and 12 bathroom mansion built in the Flemish style. I say 39 rooms because back then a place this big was practically unheard of. It sits on on the original 4-acre plot that overlooks Sheridan. Now, it had all the modern luxuries of the day. It had indoor plumbing, electricity, a state-of-the-art heating system that kept the place nice and warm during the harsh winters. And let me tell you, Wyoming in the wintertime can get harsh. There was also a basement apartment for servants, and the materials from this place came from Honduras, Italy, and Germany, and they were all shipped in by rail, and they were hauled up the hill to the estate in wagons. Now, like I said, the place has been turned into a museum, and it has been restored to its former glory. It's also been furnished with furniture, mementos, and artifacts that were donated from the Kendrick family. The mansion was built by John Kendrick, who was a self-made millionaire and cattle company owner back in 1913. John was born in 1857 in Texas, and his parents taught him the importance of hard work and told him that anything can be accomplished through hard work. But at the age of 9, John became an orphan and he went to live with relatives, and at the age of 15, he set out on his own, determined to make something of himself, and this he did. In 1879, at the age of 22, he was hired as a cowboy by a cattle baron named Wolfgen, W-L-F-J-E-N. And even though he had no experience, this Wolfgen just saw something in him that he liked, and he was impressed with John's ability to work hard at everything he did. So eventually he became a ranch foreman, and he easily learned the in and outs of the cattle business. Now, during a trail drive from Texas to Wyoming, he fell in love with Wyoming, and it wasn't long after that he bought land and he started his own ranch called the OW, and it was located at that time along the Wyoming-Montana border. Now, in 1839, when he was 34 years old, and with the blessing of his former boss, he married his former boss's 18-year-old daughter, Eula. During his life, John owned 210,000 acres. That was quite an accomplishment back then. He had several ranches. He started the Kendrick Cattle Company in northern Wyoming and southern Montana. And for a time, John and Eula did live at this OW ranch, and this is where their daughter Rosa and their son Manville were born. In 1908, they moved to Sheridan, and he began construction on Trail Inn. And the reason it was called Trail Inn is because when he built this place, this is where they expected to live out their lives. But like I said, it was not completed until 1913. Like I said, they had intended to spend their lives in this place, but that didn't happen because in 1914, John was elected governor of Wyoming, so they moved to Cheyenne. And 2 years later, John was elected to the U.S. Senate. So they moved out east, and Trail Inn became their summer home. So this was a house that he spent a lot of money to build, and it eventually just became their summer home.
Yeah, well, that usually happens when you own a lot of property and start to move about.
Well, this man had ambitions. He was not afraid of hard work, and he said he was going to make something of himself, and he accomplished all of that.
Mm-hmm.
His son Manville, I get a kick out of that name. attended school in New Hampshire, but Rosa married a military officer and moved away, and there's not really much mentioned about Rosa after that. John died in 1933, and then Eula moved back to Trail Inn with her son and his wife Diane and their two sons, Hugh and John. Now, Manville carried on with his father's business, but he wasn't the businessman his father was. And while Eula did oversee the business and helped what she could, their millions began to dwindle. And at this time, John, before he died, John Kendrick was considered one of the richest men in the country. Eula died in 1961, and Manville and his family had to move out of the mansion because by this time, the mansion was in disrepair, and he just could not afford the repairs and the restoration because he just was not a businessman. The mansion sat empty for like 7 years, and in 1968,
That's a
7
long
years
time.
this place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. In 1968, with no buyers coming forward to buy this place, the mansion was going to be torn down. But this is when the Sheridan County Historical Society stepped in and bought it, and they bought it cheap. And they also spent a boatload of money to stabilize the mansion, and they began to restore it. And they did manage to restore it enough to open it as a museum.
What size boat? A
Size boat?
a toy boat, a tugboat.
I have no idea.
Ocean liner.
They spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to make this place for people to go in. It was in such a mess that it really wasn't safe to even walk into the place.
Yeah.
Now, in 1982, though, ownership was transferred to the state of Wyoming, and they finished the restorations of the mansion and the coach house. Mm-hmm. And today, it's managed by the Division of Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resources. Now, the coach house is not open for public tours. You can go in there and watch one of their productions and stuff, but the mansion itself, you can tour the mansion. The only recorded death in the mansion was that of this groundskeeper. His name was George Zimmerman, mm-hmm. and he died of a fatal heart attack in his basement apartment. And his wife, Anna, who also worked for the family, she was a cook, was the only person with him.
Yeah.
Now, the list of claimed and reported hauntings are... a male apparition has been seen on the security camera walking around inside the mansion more than once. This apparition...
That'd be cool to see, actually.
This apparition has been caught on the security camera several times.
I wonder if they have any... when you were looking, did they have any recordings up on a website where we could all go and look?
You know, I looked for it, and nothing was posted online about this.
Oh, bummer. Maybe they have it somewhere. We just got to look a little bit deeper, I guess.
That's what I thought when I was looking for this, because when I saw that, when I read that, I thought that would be so cool to find that and put it on the show, but I couldn't find anything on that. Mm-hmm. They claimed that this apparition has been caught on the security camera several times.
Unless maybe their security system doesn't have recording, it's just a constant streaming type of thing, you know what I mean?
Could be. Yeah. Could very well be.
Interesting.
But thinking, though, that there was a trespasser, the police were called, but the police, they went through the mansion and found nobody. Police dogs have been afraid to go into the basement during a search for possible trespassers. I mean, they said that these dogs would go just about anywhere in the mansion, you know, when they would be called in about trespassers.
Because somebody saw something on camera, yeah.
Yeah, except those dogs would not go in the basement. These are police dogs. They're trained to go anywhere.
Yeah, and... Yeah, that's interesting. Wonder what's in the basement.
I don't know. Security personnel have claimed to feel an unseen presence accompany them on their rounds.
So something's walking with them and following them.
Yeah, exactly. This one in particular, they never did give his name, but he would be on his rounds going around, checking everything, and he said that he just knew someone was walking with him, but he couldn't see them.
Wow.
But you could feel their presence. Visitors have claimed to feel extreme cold spots in some of the rooms, especially on the second floor. And it's also on the second floor that there have been several reports by visitors that a rocking chair would just start rocking in front of them, and that books would fly off the shelves by themselves. And they have also
were they agitated
claimed,
that these people were in their space? That's interesting.
Well, they didn't say the books were thrown at them. They just said the books would come off the shelves. They also claimed that while on the second floor, they would get these sensations of tinglings through their body, and some would even experience dizziness.
Oh, almost like maybe the spirit was, touching them or like stepping into their body.
Right,
that's why they're feeling that.
or walking through them.
Oh yeah, they do talk.
Weird
feeling when something walks
I've
through
had that happen. And let me tell you something. That really is not a pleasant feeling.
Oh, that's right. That was at the Cheney Mansion or something.
Yeah.
I remember. That was trippy. You didn't feel right for a long time that night.
I didn't feel right for almost a week after that happened. The neighbors have reported seeing lights in the mansion going off and on all hours of the night. And the security alarm has, and still does, go off on occasion. And of course, the police go up there and they don't find anything. They have searched the grounds, they have searched the mansion, because my understanding was that the alarm system is motion activated.
Right.
Let's see. Now, most of the claims and the reports seem to come from security personnel and visitors. The regular day staff has not reported any paranormal activity. And the only apparition reported is this one that shows up on the security cameras quite often. So the question is this place haunted? There seems to be at least one spirit there, and nobody really is sure who it is. They don't know if it's John. They don't know if it's Eula. Or some claim that it's probably George, the groundskeeper, still at his job.
Yeah, but how do they know? It could have been anybody who's ever passed through this property ever in any time period. It could be anybody who worked on the building's construction, or somebody who possibly worked for the family or the family themselves or whoever. I mean, it's hard to... It's weird that people place, they're like, oh, it's got to be this or it's got to be that. Unless you get like the ghost come in, here's my, driver's license, this is who I am, because I don't know, ghost driver's, whatever, who knows? I'm just saying they don't know for sure who it is, but there's definitely some type of activity. If something's knocking stuff off on the second floor, it's moving objects and kicking it in a rocking chair, you know what I mean?
I kind of find it a little hard to believe that, for one thing, George was the only person that actually died in this place. But the thing of it is, if George was the groundskeeper, why would he be on the second floor?
Well, it doesn't. I don't think you have to. Somebody has to die in a place. It doesn't have to be old.
Well, I don't believe that either.
Too. If somebody, spirit, because people tend to have spirits that follow them. And let's say somebody came in, was touring this place, and then the spirit was like, "Oh my gosh, this place is awesome. I'm staying." You know what I mean? So
right,
it
and
could be anything.
I don't think it would be Eula, because all of the reports say that it's a man being caught on the security cameras, that it's not a woman, that it is a man. Mm-hmm. And it's the only apparition that has been reported being seen, although nobody has seen this apparition except on those security cameras.
Do they allow, when you were reading and researching, do you know if they allow paranormal groups to pay a sum of money?
I didn't see anything in there about allowing paranormal groups to go in and do an investigation, but you can go in there and walk around the place because it is a museum.
Mm-hmm. I guess somebody could always contact and ask them too.
And all of the furniture in this place did come from the Kendrick family, because they were so grateful that the place was saved, that different people from this original family and their relatives all donated furniture, period furniture and everything, and photographs and artifacts and everything. So this place is furnished with Kendrick stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, it could be anything, but it's definitely interesting. So it sounds like there's sort of like for it to camera to capture it, to set off the alarms to get the cops to keep coming. There's obviously something that's got enough energy. Now, the place is, like I said before, the place is hard to find. So you can go to their website, and they have directions on their website, because this place does sit in the middle of a residential area, neighborhood that is very, very old. And you can get, you have to have either GPS or directions to get to this place. That should be. Should we go on the next one? Because I'm ready. Are you? Go on
Sure.
The next one? Okay. Well, the next one I was going to do is something that people most probably know about. It's the Wyoming Frontier Prison. Now, this is located on Walnut Street in Rawlins, Wyoming. Now, this large plot of land was purchased in the late 1800s, and the construction of this large granite stone structure began, and it took, I think, roughly like 13 years till the doors were open for use in December of 1901. Now, in the early 1900s, the prison had about 104 cells, which they referred to it as a cell block A, and they had no running water, they had no heat, and had no electricity. Now, basically, they were in these small, like, cement cells with no toilets. And due to the overcrowding in the prison in 1904, they did eventually add like 34 more cells. But back in the day, inmates were, you know how they basically made people work while they were in jail? They kind of assigned them to like different duties to kind of help bring in money for the prison and kind of give them, I guess, like a sense of structure. Well,
some prisons did do that, because back then, very few prisons ran on federal funds like they do now.
Right. Well, back in the day, the conditions of prisons were not how they are today. I mean, it's believed they had like these certain tactics that they did to kind of actually break the prisoners. That's why they didn't offer them water, heat, electricity, toilets, and all the different things that they have now. But 1906, the prison finally finished a certain section of their construction where they called it the dungeon area, and that's where they moved like their most violent prisoners, and to kind of like, I guess they isolated them in a sense because they wanted to break them, so to speak, so that they would stop doing what they were doing within the prison walls, you know. The
prisons back then though were actually built so the treatment was actually so you would not want to come back. Today they're kind of like a country club.
Not really. But anyway, what they ended up doing is when they put them in the dungeon area, they were actually attached to these poles, and they were either whipped or beaten, or they were actually chained to a wall, and they were left in darkness practically 24/7, and they were only fed like a piece of bread and a cup of water. Now, many of them went in the hole for random reasons. They went basically for not even eating their food to killing somebody. So they just threw people in there for no reason, because this was kind of a sick and sadistic prison. It wasn't like all the other prisons. Like the guards and the warden kind of got off on abusing these prisoners. And I can see why, because of the overcrowding and the poor conditions of this prison, why many people snapped, because they were treated in an inhumane way, and a lot of people weren't even in there for really serious offense anyway. But a lot of fights were constantly occurring between the inmates and the inmates with the guards. There was riots, there was stabbings, there were suicides. Some men actually jumped to their death from the upper floors. They had prison escapes, and the inmates, when they were escaping, they were killed. During some of the escapes. You had inmates who were killed on death row by the gallows or gas chambers here. I think I read somewhere where they stated somewhere that there was over 240 some people, both prisoners and some guards, that died within those walls. And one inmate was killed by these other inmates because what they did is they grabbed him and they threw him over the railing and they were hanging him because they all hated him because he actually did this like a violent attack to this elderly woman in the local town nearby, and they caught wind of why he was in there. And he didn't just die instantly, so they pull him back up, throw him over, and pull him back up until he eventually died. Now, there were 14 inmates who were executed. 9 of them were done by hangings. 5 of them were in the gas chamber during this time. And when the prison first started in 1901, it was stated that it took 14 years later for the prisoners to finally get toilets or wash bowls in their cells. And I think it was like 60 some years later when they finally got running water and or hot water at all. So imagine like 60 some years without anything, 14 to 15 years with nothing to use, toilet, bowl or anything, so you're basically living in filth,
Exactly.
There were several weapons that were kind of smuggled onto the grounds. One of the guards, his name was Ed Samuelson, he was shot and killed in 1907 by an inmate who was trying to escape, which I don't blame people for trying to escape, how bad this prison was. There's several escapees that occurred at the prison that caused life loss of like 30 some people, I think, escaped at one time during like 1912, and they got over the barbed wire and they got into the local town and they ended up of Rollins, and they ended up killing this one guy. His name was Charles Stressner. But it was like during 2 days, in 2 days 30 some prisoners escaped this place. And that was when in 1915 they decided to make the prisoners construct like these concrete walls and towers in order to cut down on the escapes. Well, in 1966 several other buildings and cells were constructed to aid with the overcrowding. And the prison was in operation from 1901 to 1981, and they had almost 14,000 people that were incarcerated at one point, 11 of them being women. But, of course, the women were kind of transferred early in 1909 due to the unsafe conditions and being around that environment. It's kind of an understatement. That's why they moved the women out. I think they put them in, like, Colorado. Or they sent them somewhere anyway. But I was reading at one point, I can't remember what site it is. I think I do have it in the reference for later. But they were talking about the warden. It was either a warden or some of the guards. What that they ended up doing to put some fear into the prisoners is that they actually took one of the death row inmates who fought against them. They ended up skinning him and made like a pair of shoes from his skin, and then they gave either the warden or the guards, I don't know, anyway, they ended up
that was barbaric.
They ended up giving the prisoner's head to a friend. Oh yeah, the warden gave the guy's head to one of their friends, So they just did like tons of brutal things. So I'm trying to tell you like how bad it was, this prison system, how bad it was for people, the conditions that they lived in. Imagine the emotions, the anger, the depression, all that stuff just oozing out of the people. And then you have the rioting, you have the loss of life, there's people killing each other. All this is going on. Plus the guards and the warden are sick.
Well, didn't all this brutality and this barbaric treatment, didn't it go all the way up until the prison was closed in the 80s?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, but I'm trying to explain to the people why I'm talking about all this so that they'll understand why this place probably has as much paranormal activity it is. But the prison was closed down in the 80s after word got out about the brutality and the inhumane treatments that took place. Now, the prison was sitting empty for about 7 years until before it was purchased, and then it was created into like this museum, and it was put on the National Registry of Historic Places. Now, like I was saying, due to all the brutal and inhumane ways that people were treated there and how they suffered and died, like I'm saying, I believe that's why this place has tons of paranormal activity being residual and intelligent, type of ways. Now, many claim that there's, they've experienced both residual and the intelligent because the way that things are interacting with them, But just imagine these people, the men and women that were there, and even guards had committed suicide there because they couldn't stand the stress and the condition that was going on, and probably felt threatened or pressured by other guards or the warden, to keep in line with what their practices were. But, you could just imagine all the hate and the negativity that was manifesting within there, they could have even created like a poltergeist type of effect. But the fact that it could have been imprinted into the walls there, it just made like this cesspool of an environment. Now, many say they've been near or in the buildings and they've experienced like a range of paranormal activity. There's tour groups to employees that they have all mentioned of having some kind of encounter where they talk about hearing disembodied voices, they hear screams in many different cells, the showers, the death row, the gas chamber, the chapel, just tons of areas. It's like all over the place. You know, there's people talking about feeling cold spots or seeing full body apparitions of inmates. Now, many talk about feeling like a sense of different ranges of emotions, you know, from sadness to hostility, and they could just feel it on them or in the air. They talk about being scratched or pushed while they're on the tours. There were some younger people who had gone on the tours with their family, and they talked about seeing an apparition of a man hanging in a cell. You know, there's dark shadow figures they're seen throughout the whole area. Reports of an apparition wearing like a brim hat or is kind of seen in the execution room where they kind of hung all the men. Now, speaking of that, the gallows that they used was the Julian gallows, which in a way is what it does is they put the rope on the man and then they make the guy walk and, you know, basically kill himself. It's like he goes, walks up, he steps in a way, and then this water starts to go and it ends up opening the trap door, and then they drop. But the way that they designed it, the drop wasn't far enough, so it actually didn't snap their neck and hang them. They actually slowly suffocated by strangulation. Wow. So they did that for a long time until they were told they couldn't do that anymore, and that's why they moved into the gas chamber. But talk about an awful way to die, you know. And that alone would leave bad energy and resentment just from the spirits there in that section.
It would take minutes for them to die like that. Mm-hmm. And during this time, you've got someone standing there, their hands normally were tied behind their back, and they're kicking and strangling and trying to gasp for a breath. Mm-hmm. And that method would take minutes for them to die.
Right. Well, of course, you know that there's been well-known paranormal groups that have gone to this prison. You have, you know, Ghost Adventures, that's one of them. And they claim on their show that they had captured EVPs and that they, too, have seen several different apparitions. One was in the shower area. They talked about having, like, a ball of light that seemed to appear out of nowhere near one of them. Real or not, I don't know. That's not me to say or not if that's what they got or not, but it seems that many are having tons of encounters with these residual or, you know, intelligent type of paranormal activity. Now, this prison is open for paranormal groups to investigate, but it's actually really pricey, I read. So, but you can reserve like blocks of cell blocks at a time, you know, and then you can go and do your private investigation there. But you can check out the museum. The schedule changes a little bit, but right now they say it's like Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and the tours kind of go like every half an hour, and then Monday on Friday from 10:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. You can check out. No, wait, the tour is that one, and the museum is open from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Excuse me, but like I said, it's like a seasonal thing because of the weather. The times for the tours kind of change a little bit, but prices just to hit up the museum or just a tour is like $8 for an adult and $7 for like seniors and children. But as far as you having your own paranormal investigation going there, you can contact them and get and it's a little pricey, but I can see why, because you know that for many reasons, but it's going in to also upkeep the building too. If you think about where the money going to, it's going to keep that structure going. But I definitely think if you're a paranormal investigator, this is the place you want to hit up, because there was just so much brutality and so much negativity that occurred here. I think that's why there's so much activity going on, you know?
I know, this place was just, it was more than brutal. It was barbaric. This place just, back then, these prisons were designed, and they didn't have the regulations and the rules on them that they have nowadays. Prisoners were basically treated any way the guards and the warden felt, you know, and it went on and they weren't questioned about their treatment of the prisoners. And this place in particular was just one of the most barbaric as far as treatment goes in the country.
Yeah,
I can understand why there's so much activity in this place.
Well, the fact that it went on all the way up till like 1960s for these men living without toilet or anything in their room. You're just stuck in a small square cement block. And some of them had windows, and the dungeon area had nothing. It was complete darkness, and to be chained to a wall or a pole, no wonder people snapped.
And being fed bread and water.
Hardly, but yeah, this is definitely a place, and it's ginormous. The grounds alone is, I think I got one more picture. Let me look, actually. Yeah, I do have one more picture, a little bit. It's just showing a lot. You got the cemetery out there, but it was a really huge plot of land, So I'm just assuming the paranormal activity is happening all over. It's not just in the one building, but I'm sure that it's over by the cemetery and everything else I think I was reading about too. But just around on the outside, people are seeing like bowls of light and apparitions just appearing and disappearing just on the grounds when people are just on the outside of the prison as well, passing by. So it's definitely an intense place, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can well imagine. You want to take a quick break before we go into this other one?
I'm good unless you need to get some water.
I need to get some water.
Okay, we're going to take a quick 3-minute break, and then we'll continue on with the second part of our show. We have a ton more to talk about for different haunted locations throughout Wyoming. Please stick with us, and we'll be back in 3 minutes. Welcome back to Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. I'm your host, Raven, and Spooky's back with us. We're going to do the second half of Haunted Wyoming. We have a ton of variety of different spots that we picked throughout the state that seem to have a plethora of paranormal activity. We might actually end up doing a second show with this another time because there was just so many spots to pick from that seemed to...
I know it was actually hard to make a decision on this one.
Yeah, we just picked a little here and a little there and stuff. But I want to thank everybody who's hanging out with us tonight. And Spooky, why don't you go ahead and go on with your next one?
Okay, this one is the Mountain Relocation Center. It's located at 1539 Road 19 in Powell, Wyoming. Now, this is a topic we can do an entire show on. I mean, while researching this, I was amazed at the history of these camps. But for this show, I'm just going to paraphrase it. It was named after Hart Mountain, of course, which can be seen in the background. This camp, or what is left of it, is located in an isolated area of northwest Wyoming, halfway between Powell and Cody. Now, this was one of 10 concentration camps used for the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and it was ordered by Executive Order 9066 from President Franklin Roosevelt. The land was originally part of the Shoshone Project, that was an irrigation project under the Bureau of Reclamation, and in 1897, William Cody, that's right, Buffalo Bill, and Nate Salisbury bought 120,000 acres of land around the Shoshone River in May of 1899 and acquired the water rights to irrigate 60,000 acres around Cody, Wyoming. But the project proved to be too costly and the original investors backed out. So eventually the federal government, after being petitioned by the Wyoming State Board of Commissioners, took over, and the rights for the land were transferred to the Secretary of Interior in 1904. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Shortly after, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066. Now, this gave the military commanders authorization to create zones from which any and all persons may be excluded. And what that meant was that if you were a Japanese American or even an Italian American or a German American, you were not allowed in those excluded areas. Now, and they could place you in what they called an internment camp. Now, these weren't exactly internment camps. Some of them were actually concentration camps. But the War Department designated Western Washington, Western Oregon, Southern Arizona, and all of California as exclusion zones. It also defined like Japanese Americans, Italian Americans, and German Americans, like I said before, as the people to be excluded. Now, the War Department initiated removal of over 110,000 Japanese Americans from these areas and forced them into what they called assembly centers, while construction of permanent relocation centers were completed. Now, these assembly centers were typically large converted public spaces such as like fairgrounds, horse racing tracks, any place that they could put up a tent or whatever, and get you in there. In June of 1942, about 46,000 acres was transferred to the project, and under the direction of the Army Corps of Engineers, 740 acres were enclosed with this high barbed wire fence and 9 guard towers. And inside this fence, there was like 650 military-style buildings, and 468 of them were used as residential dormitories to house the detainees. I hate that word.
I didn't even like what they did anyway with this, when they...
I know, but detainees, these people were prisoners. They were not detainees, they were prisoners.
They were treated
and like the rest were used for like administration, schools, a hospital, which was mainly a Band-Aid station, and a utilities facility. The place did contain electricity, which was rare for Wyoming during this time. But the buildings were poorly constructed because of the time frame given, which was about 3 months to build this place. It was built in the middle of a Wyoming desert.
I know. The whole thing is messed up. And this, like you said, alone is a whole show in itself. But the way that these people were, they were Americans at the time. Real Americans being forced into, a prisoned camp, basically, just because of their, because of who they were. They were Japanese. Imagine if they decided, okay, we're just going to round up and throw you in too.
These so-called Japanese Americans, 90% of them were born in this country.
Yeah, most of them were. A lot of them were. Yeah. So it's just this whole show, that aspect is awful. But this go on.
I know, but like I said, we can do an entire show on these camps. Like I said, the place was built in the middle of a Wyoming desert, but it was close enough to the railroad so the detainees and the food could be brought in easily, and they wouldn't have far to take them. And life at the camp was not easy, but Heart Mountain was one of the better camps. Now, this isn't saying much.
Yeah.
Japanese Americans that were lucky enough to be given a job were only paid like $12 to $19 a month because it was deemed that they could not earn more than an Army private, no matter what job they held. For example, a white female nurse made $150 a month, but a Japanese American doctor was only paid $19 a month. School supplies and furniture were very, very limited. Matter of fact, they were hardly any at all. But the children attended because it gave them some sense of normalcy. The first year alone, there were 1,500 students that graduated from the high school. The women put up curtains in these barracks to give their families some sort of sense of privacy and a sense, of their own area. Because, there would be, there were 468 buildings, and they were barrack style.
Yeah.
And you had entire families in these places.
Yeah. But imagine being an American, and then people say, your government will never do anything to you, whatever. The history proves it time and time again. These guys were Americans. They did nothing wrong, and they were packed up and thrown into these detention prison camps.
They were forced in these places.
And they say it's for your
protection. These people did not go willingly.
No.
Right. These people did not go willingly. They were forced into it.
But don't believe that someday it's not going to happen to anybody else. It can happen anytime when things like this go crazy. It's just...
These people were ripped from their homes and their friends. And some families ended up in different camps. So families did not all go together.
Nope.
Sometimes the families were split up. The hospital, it couldn't treat the more serious diseases or wounds or afflictions, but they had no choice. It was either die in the camp or on the way to the nearest large hospital, which was about 80 miles away. The younger males were given the choice of joining the military or being drafted. Now, most refused unless they were given their freedom and their civil rights were reinstated.
Well, nobody wants to go to war against your own family members who might still be in the country, you know what I mean?
Well, not only that, they were forced into this place and then by the military and then expected to serve in the military.
Yeah.
Most of them refused, like I said. Now, while some did serve, Heart Mountain had the most resistance than any other camp. And it had the smallest population than any other camp. And in all, 85 were arrested and prosecuted for violation of the Selective Service, which was the draft. Now, those that did go, they were sent to this segregated unit known as the
442.
I'm starting to get tongue-tied, and I apologize. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Now, this team, and you guessed it, it was made up of Japanese Americans. It was also known as the Go for Broke Regiment because of their fearless and sometimes reckless way of fighting. 15 were killed in action. 52 were wounded, and 2 received the Medal of Honor. And these were people who were classified as enemy aliens, unstable, and ineligible for military service. Now, after the war, the detainees were released. But
after a long while, wasn't right away, because it took them a while before they actually started releasing people from these detention camps.
No, some of them, like Heart Mountain, when the war was over, they actually opened up the gates.
Right away? Well, good for
the war was over, they went and opened up the gates and says, there you go, you're free. You know, sorry for the inconvenience. They were given $25 and a one-way ticket back to the place where they were first detained.
Yeah, good luck finding if your house is still there.
Yeah, because somebody else probably owned it by then.
Yeah.
That is, if it was still standing.
Yeah.
Now, today, foundations, the hospital, the high school storage shed, and there is an Honor Roll World War II memorial, and parts of one of the barracks and 3 more buildings are all that are left of this concentration camp. And this place is on the National Registry of Historic Places. Now, visitors have reported the feeling of being watched, heavy footsteps behind them, and when they turn and look, there's no one there. They hear disembodied voices. They hear sounds of crying. They said that they get this feeling of deep sadness, and some of them have even claimed that this sadness overwhelmed them to the point that they themselves started crying and they didn't know why. Now, I consider this one of the darkest times in American history, and I did not even really touch on the subject.
Well, you have the Native American almost complete genocide, too.
Right. Well, like I said, this is one of the darkest times in American history. And I didn't even really touch on this topic because I intend to do a show on this in the future. But these people did without. Some of them were very prominent in civilian life.
Yeah, so but it was the paranormal activity.
There were food shortages, there were water shortages. In the wintertime, these buildings were so badly built that they would stuff newspapers and whatever they could find in the cracks to keep warm. It was just awful. It wasn't a life that I would even wish on my enemy.
Right. But do people see like apparitions and stuff there, or what exactly?
There hasn't really been any reports of apparitions. It's mostly feelings that you get. And there have been people that said once they have walked onto the property, they just get this feeling of just complete and total sadness and hopelessness.
So it's probably, you think a lot of it's just like residual leftover
I think it's residual
by those who were forced in there.
Right. It sounded to me, or what I got from what I was reading on this place, that it's mostly residual. But there have been reports, though, of footsteps in the buildings. And the feeling of being watched.
Well, I'm going to go into Fort Laramie next here. I thought this one was kind of interesting, for sure. That we're going to do show topics on these camps like this and stuff that happened to the Native Americans and the Japanese Americans and other people, because we do a wide variety of shows and stuff. But when we do these paranormal state shows, we try to give a little history and to explain why these places probably have the activity that they have. And I can definitely see why that might have had some imprinted emotion and energy left over at that place, because I can only imagine. But
Yeah, most of it in that place is, and like I said, I think it's residual. I think it's
Yeah.
imprinted
Sorry,
with
had a
all the
cough.
negativity and the sadness and everything there.
Right. Well, Fort Laramie seems to be kind of like a popular place for historians as well as some paranormal type of enthusiasts, if you want to call it, just because of the things that go on here. But back in the mid to late 1800s, there was these two men. Their name was William Sublett and Robert Campbell, I believe his name was. Well, they decided to build Fort William along the Laramie and the North Platte rivers because at the time, during the mid to late 1800s, it was like this amazing spot, which was good for traversing across. Plus, you have the river, and for horses or whatever to kind of graze and stuff. It's just a good spot. So they decided to put up like a fur trading spot here, and it would be good for people to come through and get restock up on their supplies and what have you, because it was between the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains. But in 1835, both these men ended up selling the fort to this other people, which ended up being like the American Fur Trading Company. And they ended up replacing the basic log structure that they had built and put better constructions. They were like adobe bricks and what have you. You know what I mean? But you can answer the thing in chat speaking. I'm going to finish reading this stuff. But anyway, in 1835, the American Fur Trading Company came and they replaced the old construction with the new brick, and they ended up calling it Fort John. And then in 1841, it helped aid many of the travelers that were traversing across the Oregon and California Trail. And the fort was eventually purchased by the U.S. Army to help aid the safety of those who were migrating from the east to the west, and it became a very prominent military supply, and they ended up renaming it the Fort Laramie in 1849. Now, the fort began to take on like this new look as the Army kind of took over, and they built several different buildings. They built like an officer barracks, stables, guard posts, some ammo supply buildings, kind of like a bakery was put in there too. And then over the years, the fort continued to grow in size, of course. Well, the Fort Laramie was like this very important, not only for the safety of those who were kind of traveling, but also was used as a prime spot for the transportation and the communication through the Central Rocky Mountains with the stage lines, the Pony Express. You had like the telegraph, and just, of course, for those guys who were traversing across the trails. Now, for a while, the fort was successful with, I think, several different treaty, because, with the Native Americans who were living in the area and stuff, they were trying to negotiate with them to kind of help out, because there was a lot of people who were coming from the west and going across, and it was just tons of people, and of course they were overtaking a lot of their land. So, they made a couple negotiations with the Northern Plain Nations and the Horse Creek, but, you had massive amounts of immigrants that were moving in the area, and they were encroaching on the native families' ancient areas, and of course tension began to rise. And I read somewhere that it was stated that an estimated, I think, like 50,000 pioneers had passed through that fort by 1852. And because of the rising tension, in 1984, they had the, what was it called?
1854.
Oh, what did I say?
1954. I'm sorry, dear.
1854.
I had to stop and think about it.
No, it happened in 1854. There was like this grand massacre that occurred between the Army and the natives of the Great Plains area. And after the Native Americans' war kind of diminished down, Fort Laramie was no longer kind of needed, and the fort ended up being abandoned. And then it was sold in 1890 to some local folks who lived in the area, and a lot of the structures were, some of them were moved or they were taken down to be used to build other stuff. but not all of them, because some of the folks actually wanted to keep many of the structures intact because of the history of this place and what it served for. And in 1927, the Wyoming Historical Landmark Commissions got enough attention to actually get the National Park Service people. And then on July 16 of 1938, the old fort became known as Fort Laramie's National Historic Monument. Now, what I was reading and from a lot of people talking about, there's like tons of paranormal activity that seems to occur at this fort, and it started happening as far back as the 1800s when it was first known as Fort John, because according to some of these sites, when the fort was still used as a trading post for the American Fur Company, one of the men, or one of the agents that was kind of in charge there and was working there, he had ended up bringing out his daughter to come visit him for a while. And after she was staying there for a while, she kind of begged to stay there. I think she was like in her mid-teens or early 20s type of age, you know what I mean? She kind of like begged to stay. She didn't want to return back home because she was actually really enjoying the life out there at the fort. Well, of course, her father was kind of concerned for her safety due to the area. So he kind of agreed, but he advised that she could never leave the fort without any escorts, and that she kind of had to have escorts with her at all times. Well, several men were kind of assigned to be near her, and one day she ended up riding off on horseback on her own, and by the time these two men spotted her, she was a ways off, so they kind of chased after her, and they pleaded for her to stop, but she just ignored them, and her and her horse just, she sped off even faster, and she just took off down the prairie way. I guess at the time that's what it is, prairies. But she was never seen again. Well, her father and several men went out looking for her, but they never found a sign of her. And I guess over the years, many have claimed that her spirit has been seen on or near the fort on the Oregon Trail. And many claim she appears as a spirit wearing like this long green dress. And she has like this veiled hat. And she has, dark hair. It's kind of tucked up under her veil hat, and she's riding on this black steeded horse. And some say that it comes like almost every 7 years, but the Native Americans saw her, as well as people who lived at the fort for a while until it was no longer used. But people still, every 7 years, that's when they tend to see this apparition of a woman in that area. And I thought it was kind of interesting why every 7 years, but, that they seem to notice her more. It may happen more than that, but it seems like that seems to happen the most. Now, some say the captain quarters was built in 1870s, and they hear a lot of disembodied footsteps and voices. Doors are opening and closing. People see strange lights. And the thing is, I don't think there's electricity, if I remember, at this place. I think it's this one or the other one. I can't remember. But there's strange lights are often seen at night within the structure. And yeah, there is no electricity at this place. So there should be no lights at all at nighttime when the place is closed down. And people are seeing, as they're passing by and stuff, lights within the buildings and everything else. And it's not like flashlights or anything. But the barracks, they hear disembodied footsteps and voices when they're there. There's a spirit that some believe to be that of an officer. He's often seen in the old Beldam building telling people to be quiet. Those who are touring, they're like talking and stuff. People always hear this voice saying, be quiet, There's apparitions of a surgeon. He's being seen in his clothing, and it's kind of covered in blood. There's a spirit of a man in a raincoat that's often seen. He's speaking to another unseen person. There's a headless apparition that's been seen standing near the Deer Creek Deer Creek that kind of runs through the fort land. There's this spirit that's seen there with no head, just skipping stones, and they say when people encounter this spirit, it's actually very threatening to those that come near. It's not very friendly by any means. There's some visitors who claim to have seen apparitions of 2 adults and children in the officer quarters. Some talk about having, when they're touring there, they have the door shut on them, and when they open the door, there's no one there. So they struggle with getting the door open too. They thought maybe somebody was playing a trick on them, holding them in the room. When they get the door open, there's nobody there. People talk about experiencing cold spots, all over the fort, especially during hot summer days. You shouldn't even feel that time of cold there.
No.
But to be honest, these type of places like this, I'm not surprised that they do have these old structures, that they do have residual or these intelligent type of hauntings, and that people are seeing them during the day and at nighttime, especially if some of the people that resided here at one point were involved in the Native Wars, and a lot of people were killed during, the genocide, unfortunately, both sides, the Native American and the the people who were the army and whatnot. But I think many of the spirits are still roaming and are restless from time to time period, when it comes to this stuff.
I'm curious, this apparition of this woman that's seen every 7 years, did it happen to mention when the last time it was seen?
2004, I think it was the last one that they seen her. So let's see, 5, 6, 7, 8.
She should have been seen in 2011 then.
I don't know, but I was just, maybe somebody did. I don't know, but I think the last one that I personally read myself was like 2004.
Well, it was probably the last time it was actually reported.
Yeah.
I was just curious. I'm also curious about why there's an apparition there with no head. That just seems kind of odd to me, because I have read about this too, and I don't remember anything about anyone being beheaded.
I didn't say somebody was beheaded. I just said that there was a headless apparition. But who knows? Because if you have war back then, they used any means to survive. People had, the natives.
Could have been an apparition that just didn't reveal its head, too. I mean, people see partial apparitions
and you had
quite
native
often.
wars going on. There was people who were scalped or beheaded many times during those.
Right.
It was a brutal war between different people who had different opinions and of what was right and what wasn't wrong, and it's just a part of our history. But when war happens, bad things do occur, and I think maybe some spirits do stick around because of what happened to them.
I kind of get the impression, though, that this land was haunted before they put up that first fort.
Could be. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say in general, because we're not experts, but we're just talking about everything that is talked about when it comes to these areas and when it comes to the history of our country. It is what it is. We're both supporters of our country, but we're not going to deny what has occurred here. And hopefully, as humans, we'll always keep evolving,
I'm very patriotic. I really, 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 really love this country.
I know, but we're just responding to a comment that came in. But this is just part of our history. Our history, and it does occur. But hopefully, as humans, we'll learn that, there shouldn't be division, that we're all connected, not just by country, but we all should be connected because we live on the same planet and we're all connected.
Exactly.
But I can't tell you why these spirits are there, but I can only make assumptions why some of them may be there, just because it has a long history and there's a lot of people.
That's true.
50,000 people at one time, migrated through this fort on their way to their dreams and new future. And there were loss of life from diseases and everything just from traversing, and the wars and everything else. So it is fascinating. And there was somebody who was in chat earlier had mentioned that they had been here before, and they said that the place is actually really creepy, a creepy feeling when you're there and stuff. So.
Well, it's like you say, we're not experts, and we don't know why this place is haunted. It seems to have been haunted a long, long time before the first fort. The only thing we can do is just kind of, read what we find and give our own opinions and maybe come to our own conclusions or even guess. Mm-hmm. But we don't know why.
Yeah, but it's definitely interesting.
But I did get the impression, though, that this place that the land itself was haunted before they started building on it. And it's like you say, 50,000 people went through this place, and not all of them made it, like you say, they fought with Indians. And it's not only, immigrant spirits on the property, it's on the land, it's probably Native Americans too. There were diseases.
Well, there's animal spirits though, because that lady is seen with the horse, but I wonder, because they talked about a lot of when the people were seeing it, they'd say there was one guy out on the trail, he was doing something and he saw this woman riding up at him on full speed, and he was trying to get her attention to stop, and she didn't stop, and he noticed that there was no prints in the ground to where this horse was going across or anything. And then he said also there was no sound, and then she just kept going and then disappeared down into the prairie, and it seems to keep happening. Wonder, so I wonder if that's a residual thing.
And then you wonder what happened to her. She was riding off across the prairie and just disappeared. Did she hit a time warp or
no,
something?
But back in the day it wasn't very safe.
No, it
because
wasn't.
We talked about serial killers that were families of serial killers that were preying on those who were migrating from the west to the east, and there was a lot of people
and you had
pirates and river pirates and everything else.
Yeah, you had road bandits, that would hop out and kill travelers for their money and their possessions. There, you had all kinds of hazards and dangers.
You want to go on the next
during
one?
That period.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the Old Faithful Inn. It's located in Yellowstone National Park, and it's near West Yellowstone, near the Wyoming-Montana border. Now, this is the largest log hotel in the world, and it may be the largest log building in the world. It was constructed in the winter of 1903 and 1904, and it not only boasted steam heat, but also electric lights. It was built with local materials, including pine and rhyolite stone. One of the main features is the huge stone fireplace that is 16 square feet at the base and extends to the roof. But because of damage from an earthquake, the fireplace is no longer in use. It's still there, but they don't use it anymore. And another feature is the view to the geyser Old Faithful, hence the name of the lodge. The original cost for this place was $140,000 and another $25,000 to furnish it. And all the materials to build this came from within the park. Now, the inn has been expanded and modified several times. The original inn was 120 rooms, but in 1913, the East Wing was added because the place just became so popular. In 1922, the dining room was enlarged, and in 1928, the West Wing was added, and the front of the main building expanded. Now, also in 1948, they put in automatic fire sprinkler and fire doors in the wings, and this inn has survived several fires, including the huge forest fire of 1988. Now, the inn today still contains some of the original furnishings and the rustic charm that it has held for over 100 years. And some of the more notable visitors to the inn were like Chester Arthur, who was the 21st president. He camped outside of the East Wing area in 1883. Theodore Roosevelt visited the site in 1903. Warren Harding in 1927. Calvin Coolidge also in 1927, and Franklin Roosevelt in 1937. Now, while researching this, I was amazed at the number of ghost stories associated with Yellowstone National Park.
Well, all those national state parks and everything, there's a plethora of paranormal things and cryptid things and UFO things. It's amazing what goes on in those national parks.
I know. This wasn't just this lodge. This was also Yellowstone National Park.
Mm-hmm.
Is full of ghost stories. One of the most well-known stories is in 1915, in New York, a wealthy owner of a shipping company had an 18-year-old daughter that was a bit of a rebel. Excuse me. And she rejected an arranged marriage to another young man from a wealthy family. Instead, she wanted to marry an older man who worked for her family as a servant. Well, her father had this plan, and he offered this very, very large dowry to the couple with the condition that that would be all the money they would ever receive from the family, and the couple was never to return to New York. And he did this because he thought that the older man would back out of the marriage if he knew that, you know, he was not going to receive any more money from this family ever again. But the plan backfired, and the couple took the money and got married. Well, they went to the Old Faithful Inn for a honeymoon, and at the time, like I said, this was a very popular place, which it still is, and it was very fashionable for people to go there, especially, you know, honeymoon there. And but it didn't take long for this husband to show his true colors, so to speak. He gambled almost all the money away, and the couple were left penniless. Now, this caused a really, really bad argument between the couple, which a lot of people heard. And the man went out of the room and down to the bar. Well, the young bride called her father, but he refused to send her another penny. And when the husband went back to the room, there was this other huge fight, and this time it got more violent and it got louder. Well, the man stormed out of the room. He slammed the door, and this was the last time anyone had ever seen him again. And after a couple days, the staff decided to check on the young bride because she had not come out of the room. And when they went in there, they found the room was in a complete mess. One described it as a tornado had gone through it. And when they walked into the bathroom, there in the tub, in a pool of blood, laid the body of the young bride, minus her head.
Dang.
Now, in the crow's nest, where the band usually played, and it was this place way up toward the ceiling of the place. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows what a crow's nest is.
They had found something there, or what?
Just a minute. Anyway, there was this very strong and foul odor, and after searching, they found the bride's head. Now, it's said that the ghost of this woman can be seen wandering the stairs of the lodge with no head.
Why would he toss the head up there? That makes no sense.
I know, it doesn't. But there are some people that say this story is not true. But what is true is there is an apparition of a woman who has been seen by many guests of the lodge, and she is dressed in white, and she's wandering around the hallways. No one knows who she is or what she's looking for, and they're not even really sure why she's even there. And yes, this apparition has a head. There have also been reports of sounds of running feet in the hallway, and when people look to see who it is, there's no one there. There have been reports of a Native American woman walking the grounds outside the lodge, as well as invisible footsteps on the stairs leading to the crow's nest. In 1959, there was an earthquake near West Yellowstone, and it crumbled a chimney, and it twisted some of the timbers to the crow's nest, so it's no longer open to visitors since it has been declared too dangerous. Mm-hmm. But there have been reports of other apparitions on the grounds of this place. And like I said, there are many, many, many ghost stories associated with Yellowstone National Park.
Right. There seems to be a lot of things that seem to occur in different national state parks and forests where people are seeing strange cryptids to UFOs.
Right. That's it. Spirits. There are a lot of cryptids seen there. There are spirits seen there. And I really researched trying to find out who this woman is that haunts this lodge. And there's just absolutely nothing on her, but there are lots of reports of seeing her. Yeah. So it's one of those things that, well, she's there, but nobody knows why.
Well, most people don't, really. I mean,
and she's even been seen. Yeah, and she's even been seen walking around the balcony in the daytime, and her apparition has been seen, you know, not only at nighttime, she's been seen in the daytime too.
Cool.
And they don't know if she's one of the original owners or who she is, but she doesn't seem to bother anybody. And some people have said that she just seems to not even notice anyone at all, like she's the only one walking around there.
Well, I'm going to go on to the next one so we don't run out of time a little bit. This place was built in the late 1800s by a man named Jim Bridger. I think that's how you say the name.
Bridger.
Now, he was a trapper, and he was in the area, and it's near the Green River, and of course it looked like a promising spot to establish a fort trading post. So that's what he did in 1843, and he'd often barter with the local tribes in the area as well as those who were traveling, cross country, and they were using the Oregon, the California, and the Mormon trails. Now, the post was built of the original one was built of these two double log buildings, both about 40 feet long, and they kind of had a fencing for a horse corral that went between both the buildings, and then there was this small blacksmith area, and that was the original fur trading post during 1843. And then during 1847, many who had stopped through there often complained of the quality of the post, and they thought that it just wasn't a good quality of the ones that they've been to before. And then you had the Mormon Pioneer Company. They stopped there, I think, in July, and they complained that the prices were being too high for the supplies for such a small remote trading post. And then a lot of the people who ended up settling nearby, as well as the Mormons, they would often get in arguments with this guy, and they ended up reporting him to Brigham Young in Salt Lake City, that they would say this guy was selling illegal ammo and liquor to the local tribes, because at that time it was against the federal law to do that.
Jim Bridger was a very famous mountain man back then.
Mm-hmm. Well, he still kind of is.
And he probably did, because he did associate with the local Native Americans.
Well, there was
and
a lot
even
of
lived among them.
Yeah, there was a lot of fur traders who actually married Native women.
Right.
But anyway, Young, being a federal Indian agent, he arrived in August of 1853 with kind of like a Mormon militia of 48 men. But by that time, Jim fled before they arrived at the fort, and the men, when they were kind of rampaging through there and stuff, they didn't find any ammo, but they did find the booze, and then they ended up smashing it all. But that same year, the Mormons ended up establishing a fort nearby that supplied all the Mormon immigrants, which kind of incited Bridger. And then he ended up writing this letter to the U.S. Senator in October, making claims that they robbed him and they threatened to kill him, and that they had taken well over $100,000 worth of supplies. So then in 1854, Younger and 15 armed men, they ended up taking control of Fort Bridger, and then they built this huge 18-foot stone wall around the fort, and then they ended up building several stone buildings. And then in 1855, that's when Jim Bridger returned back to his land, and the Mormons are we'll buy the fort from him. But of course he didn't want to sell it then, because it wasn't some cheap log junky looking fort. They ended up making this really good structure, and he's I'm not going to sell it to you, I'm keeping this. Well, a month later, after a few visits with this Mormon militia, he finally agreed to sell the land for $8,000, and they paid him $4,000 kind of up front, and they're we'll pay you the rest later on. Well, during that time, many of the local tribes were kind of bothered again by all this migration of all these immigrants, and they ended up raiding a lot of the local settlers and taking their livestock and attacking travelers and stuff. And then in 1857, the Mormon War broke out, or the Utah War, whatever, there's a couple names to it. But anyway, it was during this time it was said that the Mormons left the fort, and many of the buildings were burnt down or destroyed by Wild Bill, because he set it on fire because he didn't want the U.S. Army to use that for their, their means or whatever. But because by that time the Army was heading out that way for the Utah War. But in 1858, the U.S. Army took control over Fort Bridger, and it became the Army post during 1858 to 1890, where tons of Army soldiers were, they made tons of, improvements there. They made better walls. They, build, these different types of wood and stone structures. And in 1890, the U.S. Army abandoned the fort, and in 1933, Fort Bridger became a part of the Wyoming Historical Landmark and Museum, and many talk about paranormal activity occurring here, and they talk about seeing tons of soldier apparitions, actually. And people are seeing them during the day and at night. And they talk about seeing shadow figures, objects being moved within the museum or being manipulated with. They talk about spirits actually messing with the electronical devices in there. They also see an apparition of this dog on the grounds, and many believe that this dog was one of the military dogs that is decorated in metals because it had a big role in whatever, that occurred there. Stuff. Yeah. They also talk about seeing this male entity near the graves. He seemed to kind of stick in that section. He doesn't really leave too much there. They talk about seeing these floating lights that are seen late at night at the fort. People are hearing disembodied voices, and footsteps are often heard. Of course, you have your typical cold spots that are felt in several different areas. And both people who are visiting or the employees, they speak of having tons of different encounters occurring while they're there. And I'm not sure if you can have like private paranormal investigation stuff happening here, because when I was reading I couldn't find anything. But I'm just hoping maybe people who are out traveling, because me and you would love to travel to all the different stuff that we talk about too.
Oh yeah,
just because it's
absolutely.
part of our country's history. And we love her. We love her
and
history.
I love American history.
Yeah.
I just love it.
But also the paranormal activity, it seems to occur during the day and at night. But I think if you contact the place, you might be able to find out. But they do have cabins right there on the land of the fort right there that you can stay in. So who knows? It's definitely something worth checking out, because just the history alone in this place, I can understand, again, why there's a lot of, apparitions. I don't know if the apparitions that they're seeing of the soldiers are like a residual thing or an intelligent one. I don't think all of them, are interacting, because it seems like some of them seem to do like a repeat. They're on like a repeat cycle of their actions and stuff. But it's definitely a fascinating one. Do you want to...
Just a footnote here. Jim Bridger was a famous mountain man and fur trapper. And as a matter of fact, if General Custer had listened to him, he would have never died at Little Bighorn, because Jim Bridger advised him to sit in with the Sioux and sit in on their councils and listen to what they had to say and to treat them better. And Custer didn't listen to him.
Yeah. Mistakes.
I love American history, and I'm full of little unknown, useless facts.
Well, it's not useless. It's actually good. I mean, it's learning your country's history and stuff, but it's definitely... we've always been fascinated by our history, but... do you want to go into the next one so we don't run out of time, because we both have a couple to do still?
The Wyoming State Hospital. It's located near Interstate 80 at Exit 5 at Evanston, Wyoming. Yeah, Evanston, Wyoming. Now, this is another topic I would like to do a show about, but because due to the extensive history of this place, I'm going to paraphrase it the best I can. It was once known as the Wyoming State Insane Asylum, and believe it or not, you can actually call this place and arrange a tour. You go to their website. You can go to their website for details.
Really, like a private tour? That's awesome.
Yeah, you can call. According to their website, you can call them up, and they'll take you on a tour. The idea of government care and treatment of the mentally ill was less than 30 years old when the Wyoming Insane Asylum was established. A Dr. Thomas Kirkbride, who was a Quaker from Pennsylvania, he abdicated moral treatment of the insane, stating that asylums should have curative rather than custodial functions. And in his book, Construction, Organization, and General Arrangements of Hospitals for the Insane, which was published in 1854, he stated that the institution should be at least 100 acres, the building should be fireproof, being constructed from stone or brick with a slate or metal roof, and it should be large enough to house both patients and staff. And that the asylum should only house 250 patients, and it should have like pleasant surroundings, and it should encourage the patients to regain their mental balance. Now, he stressed that staff should be trained to treat patients with kindness and gentleness. By the 1860s, several states had established asylums based on Kirkbride's principles. The Wyoming Territorial Legislature located the insane asylum in Evanston in 1887 at a cost of $30,000. Now, they did stipulate that there must be at least 100 acres so that the land can be farmed for production of income to offset hospital expenses, and the hospital should be self-sustaining.
Many were. Tons of... That's how it all kind of was. The prisons, the hospitals, and everything else to help
Exactly.
with it. Because there wasn't a lot of funds to, like we have nowadays, where people are aiding all these people who are in need of the help. You know what I mean? So,
well, back then, the states did fund some of these places. This was before federal funds came in.
Yep.
So the southern edge of Evanston on a hill overlooking the town was where they chose to build this place.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because he had served in the territorial legislature and was a strong advocate for the asylum, a Dr. William Hawker was chosen as the superintendent. Now, construction began in 1888, and in May of 1889, the asylum received its first patients. Now, in the beginning, the asylum was governed by a local board appointed by the territorial legislature. Now, this was back before Wyoming was even a state.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1890, when Wyoming did become a state, and the state government was formed, the asylum was placed under the jurisdiction of the State Board of Charities and Reform. Now, in 1891, the board replaced Hawker with a Dr. C.H. Solar.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was mostly due to politics because at the time, Hawker was a Democrat and Solar was, as well as all of the board members, were all Republicans. And Solar was responsible for the expansion of the asylum and the name change from asylum to hospital, because he said that hospital sounded so much better and people were not as intimidated or afraid. Right. He also firmly believed that one of the best ways to treat the patients was to keep them busy with meaningful work. Now, the men mostly worked the farm while the women sewed for other patients and staff and even made little decorative things to sell. They also made baked goods, which they sold. The farms and these baked goods and stuff not only fed the patients and the staff, but they were used to sell and to get money to run this place.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I'm having problems with these words. But this hospital became totally self-sufficient. Now, the hospital farm contained just about everything it needed. It had a milk barn, cattle, chickens, barn, granary, several sheds, a bakery, an ice house. And by the 1910s, it was producing thousands of pounds of beef, pork, mutton, which is sheep, and chickens.
Cool. They had tons of crops
bountiful crops, like hay, oats, wheat, and a variety of vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
And the patient population was 300.
So it was like a small little town, city.
Right. It was basically a little town in itself.
Right.
I mean, this place had it all, including abuse. Now, under Solar, the patients and some staff, because some of the staff worked the farm too, they were worked from sun up to sundown. The patients were beaten. They were put in tubs of ice water, and the staff was expected to work as long as the patients. And then, of course, as the years went by and you had these so-called new techniques for treating the mentally ill,
mm-hmm.
Which were barbaric in themselves, these patients were subjected to this.
Yeah.
Patients who died, the deaths were always listed as natural causes. In the 1940s, one girl hanged herself in her room. In fact, when you drive up to the hospital, you'll notice that there is a sheet covering a window on the second floor,
mm-hmm.
and that's because people on the outside would report a woman hanging in this room.
Well, that's
And when the staff would
unsettling.
run up and investigate, there would be nothing there.
Yeah.
And this was something that occurred every single night. There were people that would report her that were just driving by. They would look up and see this, and they would
No, because they're
whip
disturbed
in.
and call
Yeah,
people for help or something. Yeah.
yeah. And there were so many complaints against Solar and his treatment of the patients, but nothing was ever done about it. And it's believed that the reason was because this hospital farm was so productive, and also because of his ties to the people on the board. Because, like I said, they were all from the same political party.
Okay.
Eventually, a part of one of the buildings was renovated to accommodate families who came to visit their relatives who were patients. What it did, it gave them a room to stay in overnight, especially, if they came from a long distance to visit one of their relatives, because this is the only mental hospital in Wyoming, or it was at the time. And so everyone, and there were even people from Nebraska, like Western Nebraska, that was sent to this place. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Evanston, Wyoming, but it's on the western side of the state. But anyway, there was one woman reported that while her husband was a patient, she and her daughter drove from Nebraska to visit him. And while they were in their room, they heard these loud voices coming from the bathroom. And thinking it was the plumbing,
Voices or noises?
Noises.
Oh.
And they thought it was the plumbing, because it was like a banging sound.
Right, pipes.
And sometimes old plumbing will do that.
Yeah.
So they dressed and they visited with their relative, husband, father. And that evening while they were in bed, suddenly there were these really, really loud bangings coming from the bathroom. And when they looked, there was no one in there. And they claimed they kept hearing voices in the room, and they were so afraid that they stayed awake until morning. And the next day, before they again visited their relative, they stopped at the front desk and they complained about the people out in the hallway, and they were told that they were the only ones staying there at the time. So that night, after they got done visiting with their relative, they slept in the car and they left at daylight. Now, they also claimed that they heard footsteps running up and down the hall and outside their door. And again, when they would open up their door and look, there was no one there. And like I said, the front, and when they complained, they were told there was no one else in that building, no other guest in that building but them. Even staff and other patients have reported hearing footsteps, of seeing apparitions, of hearing voices, blood-curdling screams, and many of them were told that it was only their overactive imaginations. And now I can understand maybe saying that to a patient, but not to the staff. And several of the patients and even the staff, when they left the place, they not only reported the paranormal activity, but they reported the abuse. And there was absolutely nothing done about this guy that was running this place. And in the main old building where the sheet is covering the window, the apparition of the hanging woman is said to occur every single night. And there is no electricity in that building, but there's been reports of strange lights throughout the building. And today, this building still stands, and there are plans to renovate it and use it again.
Cool. I like when people use old buildings and keep them up to date. I'm going to jump right to the next one because we're going to go over by a couple minutes. But the last one is Cedar Mountain, located in Park County, Wyoming. Cedar Mountain, which many refer to as Spirit Mountain, is 7,890 feet in elevation and is like the smaller of the two peaks just west of Cody, Wyoming. Now, the two mountains are divided by the Shoshone River, and there's this large cavern system that runs beneath the mountain, and it can be accessed by different points there. But in 1909, the area was called the Shoshone Cavern national monument, and it was the second monument created in Wyoming during that time. Now, for several decades, the cave was taken care of by the National Park Service, but eventually was delisted and is now back under the control of the local government. But the cave system was said to be discovered, which I'm thinking more of rediscovered, only because I'm sure there was, over the eons of the years, that someone probably passed by it long before this man brought it to the attention to have it deemed as a, national monument. But anyways, the guy's name was Ned Frost, and he was out with his retriever, and they were out hunting this bobcat, and it took off into that section, and they ended up stumbling upon this huge cavern, or this cave. And when he went inside, he noticed this large room which had many, many passageways branching off. And this cave system, the way that they were describing it, had like this array of different coloring of crystals within. And that's when Frost told, people about what he discovered. And it actually reached the ears of William F. Buffalo Bill Cody, who himself went to explore and see the cavern system himself. And they don't even...
Oh, Bill puts his hand in a lot of things, don't he?
Well, he loved it there, actually. And there's a fight about it where, they claimed he wanted to be buried there, and he's buried somewhere else. And then people stole his body and put him here, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but he went to explore this system himself. And the whole cave system hasn't even been 100% explored or mapped out. There's a lot of parts that haven't been. But it was in 1954... like I said, it was when it was delisted and transferred over to the Bureau of Land Management and is known as Spirit Mountain Cave today. Well, the cave is blocked off by a gate, but the key is held by the BLM. So if anybody wants to explore the cave, they can call up the Cody office of, the Bureau of Land Management, or just kind of stop by and get a permit and the key and go in and do some, what do they call it? Splunking? I don't think that's water.
Splunky.
No, that's
splunking.
That's for underwater cave exploring. Never mind. Anyway, they can go in there and do a little cave exploring and stuff. Me, I wouldn't, because I'd be freaked out being underground. But
I can't believe that you can stop in there and get a key to the cave.
Well, you have to get a permit and fill out some stuff or whatever and get a key. But many think that the cavern system, like I said, has tons of undiscovered areas and passageways, and they think that it runs underneath the whole entire mountain, possibly even leading out to the Shoshone River. Well, Spirit Mountain is said to kind of have like a plethora of paranormal activity as well as cryptids. Now, many say while they're exploring the mountain or the cavern systems that people are actually hearing, disembodied footsteps and voices within the cavern system, and there's nobody there, because you can't just go in there because it's blocked off. Right. You have to have permission and stuff. No, they think it might be that of people who have gone exploring and got lost and perished from times before. People talk about seeing these shadowy figures as well while they're in and around the area, as well as in the cave system. And they have stories of these little people who seem to reside within the cavern system. I don't know what these little people are and how mischievous they seem to be, but it seems to be talked a lot about. But true or not, I mean, we don't know. But all the things that we talked about, these are just stories that people have been sharing of their encounters, when it comes to Spirit Mountain and, the hotels and the forts and the prison and the hospital and everything that we were talking about tonight. And, we just wanted to kind of give, like we always do this, give a little bit of history on the area to explain to you guys what it is and stuff, and then talk about the stories and the reports and the claims that people seem to be experiencing there. A lot of this is open to the public where you guys can go in and visit yourself. So maybe your next vacation time, you might hit up some of these places in Wyoming. But Spooky, because we're over time, why don't you go ahead and let everybody know what we're going to be doing next?
Okay, I want to thank our mods, Holly and Richard, for doing a good job. I want to thank Raven for a good show. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and thank you for coming. Join us Tuesday, December 27th at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Come and chat and listen to our show when we will discuss deadliest women throughout history, Margaret Waters and Amelia Elizabeth Dyer. Now, warning, some of the content may be disturbing to some, So listener discretion is advised. Thank you for coming. Please subscribe to us, give us a like, and share us with others on any social media site you may be a part of.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, for sharing us. We'll see you guys around the net, possibly at other shows. If you do want show reminders, you can click on the little bell symbol down by our Spooky Raven name, and then you can subscribe there, or you can also get notifications for this channel, or you can go to our website anythingbutordinary2.wix.com/anythingbutordinary, and you can sign in or sign up for weekly reminders through our email, or you can contact us and banter about whatever, or even make show suggestions. Thank you, everybody. Hope everybody has safe holidays for those who celebrate it, and for those who don't, I hope you have a really good, positive week. And thank you for hanging out with us, and we'll see you when we come back on December 27th. Good night.
Good night.